A girl battling cancer, selling her artwork on the streets, not for pity, but for passion. A legend, Shaquille O'Neal, walks by and sees what the world has ignored. One painting, one conversation, one moment that changes everything. But what happens next? No one sees coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. The city never stopped moving. It pulsed with life. Horns blaring, voices overlapping, the rhythmic chaos of people chasing something unseen. But in the midst of it all, there was a girl who sat still. A worn-out sketchbook lay open in front of her, its pages smudged with charcoal and paint. Beside her, a small wooden sign, hand-painted in careful strokes. Original art for sale. No pity, just passion. She wasn't begging. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't even looking up at the people who passed her by. She was too busy creating. Her name was Lena Carter, and she was 17. Once she had a future filled with color. A scholarship to an art school in New York. A portfolio that had impressed professionals twice her age. But the call had come on a cold November afternoon. The kind of call that freezes time. Stage 3. Hodgkin's lymphoma. The kind that doesn't wait for dreams to come true. Her mother, Evelyn, had fought. Phone calls, insurance appeals, sleepless nights over piles of unpaid bills. But cancer didn't wait for bureaucracy. Treatment was expensive, and time was running out. So Lena did what she knew best. She painted. Every morning, she dragged her art supplies to her spot near Grand Park, where business people and tourists rushed by, barely sparing a glance. She painted on canvas scraps, old wooden panels, even discarded paper. She poured her pain, her defiance, her hope into every stroke. But people didn't see that. They saw a sick girl with a scarf wrapped around her head, sitting on the sidewalk like she was part of the city's background noise. Some dropped a few crumpled bills into the little box next to her work. Some offered sad smiles, murmured, "Stay strong," and walked away. Pity. Lena hated pity. She didn't want their sympathy. She wanted them to see her art, to recognize it for what it was. But no matter how many paintings she sold, it was never enough. The chemo bills piled up, the exhaustion grew worse, and some days she wondered if fighting was worth it. And then one day, he walked by. Big Shaq never walked unnoticed. At 7'1", he was impossible to miss. The city might have been loud, but when Shaquille O'Neal stepped onto a street, heads turned. Today was supposed to be simple. A meeting, a charity event, maybe a quick stop at his favorite diner. He wasn't thinking about anything except grabbing a coffee before his next stop. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A painting. Not just any painting. It was a portrait of a child, standing in the middle of a storm, head held high, eyes burning with determination. The brush strokes were raw, powerful, filled with emotion that clashed and blended like a battle on canvas. Shaq had seen a lot in his life. He had grown up with struggle, fought his way to success. He had seen talent, ambition, heartbreak. But something about this painting hit different. He turned his gaze to the artist. A girl, too young to look that exhausted. Her fingers were smudged with paint, her frame thin beneath an oversized hoodie. She wasn't looking up. She wasn't selling. She was creating. Curiosity took over. He stepped forward, towering over the small display of artwork. The girl didn't flinch. Shaq cleared his throat. "How much?" Lena barely glanced up. "Which one?" "That one." He pointed at the storm child. She shrugged, wiping her hands on her jeans. "100. Shaq raised an eyebrow. For a painting like that, she could have been asking for thousands. "You sure?" A flicker of irritation crossed her face. She sat up straighter, finally meeting his gaze. "I don't do charity." That hit him like a punch to the gut. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken weight. Shaq had seen that look before, in kids who refused to let the world break them. He could have just bought the painting. He could have handed her a check, wished her luck, and walked away. But something told him this wasn't just about money. "Tell me about it," he said instead. Lena hesitated. Most people didn't ask. Most didn't care. But something about the way he stood there, waiting, not rushing, not pitying, made her talk. "It's about fighting back," she said finally. "About standing in the middle of a storm and not letting it swallow you." Shaq crossed his arms. "That personal?" She exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping. "What do you think?" There was something sharp in her voice, something raw. And Shaq, he respected that. He looked around. People were walking past, barely noticing. Why wasn't anyone helping her? Then, the answer hit him. Because she wouldn't let them. She didn't want their pity. She wanted their respect. And that changed everything. Shaq took another long look at the paintings. Each one told a story. Each one held something undeniably powerful. This girl wasn't just talented, she was special. And she was struggling alone. Shaq wasn't about to walk away. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "All right, Lena, let's make a deal." She frowned. "I don't do deals." He chuckled. "Oh, you'll want to hear this one." And just like that, the moment shifted. Something big was about to happen. Something nobody saw coming. Lena just didn't know it yet. Shaquille O'Neal had walked through cities all over the world. New York, Miami, Los Angeles. But something about Los Angeles on a late afternoon always pulled him into memories. The way the light stretched shadows across the pavement. How the noise of the world melted into an unrelenting hum. He had been that kid once, the one no one noticed. Too tall, too big, too different, trying to make sense of a world that seemed too fast, too unforgiving. A boy with nothing but a dream and the will to chase it. That version of him was long gone, replaced by a legend, a businessman, a public figure. He had built an empire out of his name. Yet some days, when he walked the streets alone, it still felt like the past lingered just behind him, whispering that he hadn't strayed as far from struggle as he thought. His footsteps were heavy but steady as he moved past the usual city crowd. Street musicians playing for loose change, vendors shouting for attention, hurried professionals checking their watches. He didn't stop. He rarely did. But today, something pulled him back. He hadn't meant to look. It wasn't a choice. The painting caught him first. It wasn't big, wasn't framed or displayed like something in a gallery. It sat propped against a worn-out backpack on the sidewalk, next to an open sketchbook filled with furious pencil strokes. The image itself struck him like a gut punch. A figure, standing alone in the middle of a storm. Rain slashing down in sharp streaks, winds bending trees in the background. But the figure wasn't cowering. It was staring forward, unshaken, unafraid. Shaq knew that feeling. He had lived it. His eyes flickered to the girl sitting cross-legged beside it. She wasn't selling, wasn't advertising. She just sat there, lost in her own world, her fingers moving over a fresh canvas, completely unaware that the most recognizable man on the block had stopped in his tracks. Curiosity pushed him forward. "Hey," he said, his voice deep, familiar to millions. She didn't look up. "Hey." Not even a glance, not a flinch. Shaq tilted his head. That was new. He crouched slightly, towering even at that angle. "That one's yours?" He nodded toward the painting. This time she paused, exhaling through her nose before finally meeting his eyes. Her gaze was sharp, measured, not the wide-eyed recognition he usually got. "Yeah," she said simply. Shaq waited for the usual spark of recognition. It never came. She looked him over once, then turned back to her canvas, lifting her paintbrush again like the conversation was already over. Shaq felt an unfamiliar sensation, being invisible. He wasn't sure if he liked it or not. He cleared his throat. "How much?" She didn't hesitate. 100. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" Her grip on the brush tightened slightly. "Look, man, if you're buying because you feel bad for me, just keep walking. I don't do that pity stuff." The words weren't rude, but they hit hard. Shaq had met fighters before. He'd been one. But something about the way she said it, the quiet steel in her voice. It wasn't just a line. It was a wall. He studied her again, taking in the tired eyes, the too thin wrists, the way she shifted slightly like sitting on the pavement was normal. She wasn't just selling, she was fighting. And suddenly the painting made sense. Shaq exhaled, letting a slow smile form. "All right," he said. "No pity. Just respect." For the first time, something in her expression cracked. Not much, just the faintest flicker of surprise. Like she wasn't used to hearing that. Shaq wasn't sure what made him stay. Maybe it was the painting. Maybe it was the way she held her ground, like she was daring the world to look at her differently. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the way she reminded him of himself. And that was what changed everything. Shaq stayed. He wasn't sure why. He had places to be, meetings lined up, a schedule that didn't have time for unexpected stops. But there was something about this girl, about the way she held her ground, the way she refused to let the world define her by her struggle. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't begging. She was fighting. And Shaq respected that. "You got a name?" he asked, shifting his weight onto one knee. She glanced up from her sketchbook, paint-stained fingers tightening around the charcoal in her hand. "Lena." "Shaq." A flicker of amusement crossed her face. "Yeah, I know." He smirked. "Didn't seem like it." She shrugged, her gaze dropping back to the canvas. "Does it matter?" The answer caught him off guard. He wasn't used to that. People always cared who he was. Security guards let him in without question, cameras followed him, reporters clung to his every move. But Lena? She wasn't impressed. She just wanted to paint. Shaq let the moment settle before nodding toward the artwork. "You ever think about selling these somewhere else? A gallery? Online?" Lena let out a dry laugh. "And what? Hope some rich guy takes pity and buys one so he can post about it on Instagram?" "No thanks." Shaq studied her, the edge in her voice. This wasn't just about selling paintings. It was deeper. "I'm not trying to be a charity case," she continued, pushing stray strands of hair under the beanie covering her head. "People see a sick girl painting on the street and think, 'Oh, poor thing, let me help her out.' They don't actually care about the art. They don't see it. They just want to feel good about themselves." She glanced up at him then, eyes sharp, searching. "You get that, right?" Shaq exhaled. He did. More than she knew. "You want to tell me why you do this?" he asked. "For real?" Lena hesitated. For a long moment it seemed like she wouldn't answer. Then without looking at him, she spoke. "My dad used to say that art should be a battle, that the best pieces come from the hardest fights." Her fingers moved absently over the corner of her sketchbook, smudging the charcoal lines. "I used to think that was just some deep artist talk, but then—" She swallowed, voice steady but laced with something raw. Shaq waited. "Then my mom got the call," Lena continued, staring at the pavement. "Stage 3. Doctors talked about treatment, about options, about money." The word hung between them. Her jaw tightened. "We didn't have it." Shaq felt something twist in his chest. "My dad worked doubles at the factory. My mom tried every foundation, every program, but we didn't check the right boxes." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Too much income to qualify for assistance, not enough to actually afford treatment. You know how it is." Shaq did. Lena's fingers curled into a fist. "So my dad goes to the bank, says he's going to take out a loan. But guess what? You can't take out a loan on hope." She let out a bitter laugh. Credit wasn't great. Denied. 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 Shaq could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the weight of carrying something too heavy for 17-year-old shoulders. "So, one night, he comes home, pulls out this old wooden crate full of my drawings. He sits me down and tells me, 'We fight how we can. And you—'" Her voice caught, just for a second. He said, "You have a weapon most people don't." She turned her sketchbook around, showing Shaq the half-finished piece she'd been working on. Another storm scene, this one even darker. The winds raged, the figure in the center standing firm against the chaos. "He told me if I wanted to fight, I should do it my way." She exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "So, I did. I took every piece I had and came out here. No begging, no pity, just the art. Because if I was going to go down, I was going to go down swinging." Silence stretched between them. Shaq had heard a lot of stories in his life. He'd been through a lot himself. But this This was different. Lena wasn't just trying to survive. She was making a statement. Shaq let out a slow breath, glancing at the paintings again. Each one was filled with something beyond talent. They were alive, breathing, telling stories no words could. And people just walked by. They didn't see it. They didn't see her. Shaq didn't like that. He rubbed his jaw, thinking. So what? You just sit out here every day, selling these one by one? Lena's mouth twitched. Pretty much. And when you run out? She shrugged. I make more. Shaq leaned back on his heels, nodding slowly. He could do a lot of things right now. He could buy every piece she had, write a check big enough to cover her medical bills for the next decade. But something told him that wasn't the move. Lena didn't want saving. She wanted to be seen. And that gave him an idea. He grinned. All right, Lena, let's shake things up a little. She frowned. What? Shaq pulled out his phone, turning the camera on. Lena's eyes widened. Oh, hell no. Relax, he chuckled. Just trust me. She groaned. I don't do viral sob stories, man. If you're about to post some let's help this struggling artist thing, just... Shaq held up a hand. I told you, no pity, just respect. She eyed him warily. Shaq turned the camera toward the painting, angling it so the city noise hummed in the background. He hit record. All right, listen up, he said, his voice steady, commanding attention. I just ran into the most talented young artist I've seen in years. This question mark. This isn't just a painting, it's a fight. And if you don't see that, you're not looking hard enough. He shifted the angle toward Lena, who scowled at the phone but didn't stop him. This is Lena Carter, he continued, and you're gonna remember that name. He ended the video, tossing the phone back in his pocket. Lena crossed her arms. What was that? Shaq smirked. That? That was the beginning of something big. She didn't look convinced. And what exactly do you think's gonna happen? Shaq just grinned. Watch. The video was out. Lena had no idea what Shaq expected to happen. She had spent months out here, painting, fighting, struggling, and nothing had changed. People walked past her work every single day, barely sparing a glance. Why would this be any different? But Shaq. He looked too calm, too sure, like he knew something she didn't. Lena leaned back against the brick wall, crossing her arms. So, what now? Shaq studied the paintings again, nodding slowly. How many you got here? Lena blinked at him. What? I said. He turned, facing her fully. How many paintings you got? She hesitated, glancing at the stack beside her. I don't know. Maybe 20? Shaq nodded, then did something completely unexpected. He pulled out his wallet. All right, he said casually. I'll take all of them. Silence. Lena just stared at him. What? Shaq flipped through the bills, then glanced up, his expression serious. I want them all. What's your price? Lena's fingers curled into fists. She could already feel the weight of pity creeping into the air, pressing against her chest like a cage. No. Shaq raised an eyebrow. No? I said no, she repeated, standing up. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs, her stomach twisting. She had worked too hard, fought too long for this to become just another charity case. Shaq's gaze didn't waver. Why? Lena clenched her jaw. Because that's not what this is about. The air between them was thick now, the kind of tension that made people stop and watch. A few passers-by slowed, their gazes flicking between the towering basketball legend and the defiant girl standing her ground. Shaq let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't make things easy, do you? Lena exhaled sharply, trying to steady her voice. This isn't about easy. It's about respect. Shaq's face softened. He understood. Of course he did, but that didn't mean he was done. He turned, surveying the street, the people passing by, the tourists snapping pictures, the locals who barely noticed. Then, without another word, he stepped up onto the bench. Lena's stomach dropped. Oh no, she muttered. Oh hell no. But it was too late. Shaq cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, Hey! The entire street froze. Conversations halted. Heads snapped in his direction. People who had been too busy, too distracted, too uninterested just moments ago were now locked in. Shaq spread his arms wide. "Y'all see this right here?" He pointed straight at Lena's paintings. This isn't just art. This is a message, and I want to know, why the hell is no one paying attention?" A murmur rippled through the small crowd forming around them. Lena's pulse skyrocketed. Shaq wasn't buying her paintings. He was making the world see them. A businessman in a suit hesitated, adjusting his tie. Shaq wasn't done. He pointed straight at him. "You, what do you see?" The man blinked, stumbling over his words. "I mean, it's powerful?" Shaq nodded. "Damn right, it is. And how much you think it's worth?" The man hesitated. Shaq folded his arms, his massive presence commanding the entire space. "Let me put it this way. If this was hanging in some high-end gallery with a 5-figure price tag, y'all would be climbing over each other to buy it." Silence. Because he was right. Lena's throat was dry, her chest tight. This wasn't happening. Shaq turned to the growing crowd. "Y'all don't get it, huh? This ain't just paint on a canvas. This is someone's fight, someone's story, and you're out here walking past like it doesn't matter." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. Because now they were looking, really looking. A woman near the front stepped closer, studying the storm painting. "She made these?" Lena could barely speak. "Yeah." The woman's gaze lingered, like she saw something different now. Shaq turned back to Lena, his voice lower but just as powerful. "You wanted respect? You got it." And then, he did the last thing Lena expected. He stepped back, raised his hands, and said, "All right, let's see who's got the guts to pay what this is really worth." The shift was instant. A man in the back raised a hand. 200 for the storm piece. Someone else cut in. 300. Lena's breath hitched. A woman in designer heels, holding a leather bag that probably cost more than Lena's entire wardrobe, stepped forward. 500. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Lena's knees nearly gave out. "Shaq?" He just smiled. "Now you're getting it." And just like that, the entire street transformed. People weren't just walking by anymore. They were engaged, focused, invested. The same paintings they had ignored minutes ago were now centerpieces of attention. The bids climbed higher. 700. 1,000. Lena could barely breathe. She had fought so hard for people to see her work, but now that they finally were, it felt unreal. Shaq leaned down. "How you feelin', superstar?" She shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know." Shaq chuckled. "Get used to it." By the time the bidding slowed, every single painting was gone. Lena stood in stunned silence, her fingers clenched at her sides, her heartbeat loud in her ears. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that for the first time, people actually saw her. Shaq crouched slightly, lowering his voice. "You still think I should have just bought 'em all?" Lena laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "Okay, fine. You win." Shaq grinned. "Nah, you won." The street buzzed with excitement, strangers shaking Lena's hand, asking where they could see more of her work. And for the first time in a long time, Lena wasn't just surviving, she was seen. Lena didn't sleep that night. She tried, after everything that had happened, after the paintings had sold for more than she could ever imagine, after strangers had shaken her hand and asked about her work, after Shaq had given her that knowing smile and told her, "This is just the beginning." She tried. But her brain wouldn't shut off. The excitement, the disbelief, the sheer shock of it all pulsed through her veins like electricity. She had spent so long being ignored, so long fighting just to be seen. And now she had Shaquille O'Neal of all people blasting her name out to the world like it actually meant something. It didn't feel real. And then, around 4 a.m., her phone buzzed. She reached for it, barely awake, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark. Her breath caught in her throat. Shaq had posted the video, and it had already exploded. By 8 a.m., Lena's world was unrecognizable. She sat in the corner of the tiny apartment she shared with her mom, phone gripped so tight her knuckles turned white. Every time she blinked, the numbers jumped. 10,000 views, 50,000, 100,000. Her inbox was drowning. DMS from strangers. People calling her an inspiration, asking if she had a website, telling her they had never seen paintings like hers before. People wanted to buy. Celebrities commenting. A famous actress, a billionaire tech mogul, even an NBA player Lena had barely heard of, all reposting Shaq's video, all saying the same thing. This girl is something else. This isn't just art. This is power. How do I buy? Lena's heart pounded. This was everything she had fought for. So why did she feel like she couldn't breathe? Shaq's number popped up on her screen. She hesitated, just for a second, then answered. Hello? His deep chuckle rumbled through the line. You see it yet? Lena exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. Yeah. I think my phone's trying to break itself. Shaq laughed. Good. That means it's working. Lena bit her lip, staring at the never-ending flood of notifications. I don't know if I can keep up with this. Shaq's voice softened. You don't have to do it all at once. Just breathe. But how could she? This wasn't normal. Last week she was sitting on the sidewalk, watching people walk past her like she didn't exist. Now? Now her name was everywhere. People were talking about her like they knew her, like she was some overnight success when really, she had been fighting this fight long before anyone cared. And that's what scared her. She swallowed. Shaq, what if... She hesitated. What if this is just... a moment? Shaq was quiet for a beat. What do you mean? Lena's grip tightened around the phone. What if this isn't real? What if they're just here because you posted about me? What happens when the next viral thing comes along and they forget? The words tasted bitter. Shaq sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady, but firm. Then you make sure they don't forget. Lena clenched her jaw. How? By taking control of your own story. By noon, the offers started coming in. Real offers. Galleries that once ignored her suddenly wanted to showcase her work. Art collectors willing to pay thousands for a single piece. Companies asking if she'd do commissions. It was overwhelming. Lena sat at the tiny kitchen table, scrolling through emails that didn't even feel like they were meant for her. Lena? She looked up. Her mom stood in the doorway, worry creasing her forehead. I just saw the news, her mom whispered, eyes flickering to Lena's phone. Is this real? Lena nodded slowly. I think so. Her mom exhaled shakily, stepping closer. She looked proud, but there was something else in her expression. Something hesitant. And then softly. Does this mean we can afford another round of treatment? The words hit Lena like a brick. Because until that second, she hadn't even thought about the money. She had been so caught up in the attention, in the overwhelming flood of strangers and opportunities, that she had forgotten why she started this fight in the first place. The medical bills, the treatments they couldn't afford. Lena felt her stomach twist. She should be happy. This was good news. So why did it feel like a storm brewing on the horizon? Shaq called again that evening. How we feeling, superstar? Lena let out a breath. Like I got hit by a train. Shaq laughed. That's normal. Fame moves fast. Lena hesitated, staring at the city skyline through the apartment window. It's a lot, Shaq. He didn't push, didn't try to tell her it would be fine. He just let the silence stretch for a moment before asking, What's bothering you most? Lena closed her eyes. None of these people cared last week. Shaq didn't answer right away. Then, do you want to be angry about that? Lena's grip on the phone tightened. I don't know. She did. But she also didn't. Because even if this was all just some temporary social media-driven frenzy, it was still more than she had before. Shaq sighed. Look, I get it. The world's weird, Lena. People only pay attention when someone tells them to. But that doesn't mean what they see isn't real. Lena swallowed hard. What if this is just another trend? Shaq's voice was steady. Then you make sure it's not. Lena frowned. How? Shaq's grin was almost audible. By giving them something to remember. 2 hours later, Shaq did something nobody expected. He posted another video. This time, it wasn't just about Lena's paintings. It was about the fight behind them. He filmed himself standing in front of one of Lena's storm pieces, pointing at the fierce brushstrokes, the emotion behind it. "This," he said, voice steady. "This isn't just a painting, this is a battle. And now, the world's watching." Then he turned the camera to himself. "I want to see who's paying attention. You say you love her work? Prove it. I challenge everyone out there. Show Lena Carter the respect she deserves." And then, the twist. "I'm personally commissioning the next piece she makes, and I'm putting 50 grand on it." Lena's breath stopped. 50,000. She nearly dropped her phone. The video hit 1 million views in under 2 hours. And just like that, Lena Carter wasn't just a viral artist anymore. She was a movement. Lena had thought she was ready for anything. She had fought for every inch of ground beneath her feet, pushed back against every person who tried to take advantage of her, stood tall even when the world wanted to knock her down. But nothing prepared her for this. Because betrayal didn't come from strangers. It came from the people you thought would protect you. She was sitting in Shaq's office when it happened. He had brought her in to discuss her next big move, gallery offers, commission deals, the future of her work now that the world was watching. But her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First one notification, then another, then a flood of them. She frowned, unlocking the screen, expecting to see another wave of buyers. Instead, she saw her own story, ripped apart, twisted, and sold to the highest bidder. The headline punched her in the gut. "Shaq's art prodigy hides a dark secret, the real story of Lena Carter." Her vision blurred as she scrolled through the article. Her illness, the financial struggles, her father's failed attempts to save her, the nights she went to bed hungry. Details that only a handful of people knew. Shaq's voice came from somewhere in the background, but she couldn't process it. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, because at the bottom of the article, beneath the byline, was the real knife to the chest. A quote from her own mother. Lena felt the air leave her lungs. The room had gone quiet. She didn't even realize she had dropped her phone until Shaq picked it up. His expression darkened as he skimmed the screen. "Damn," he muttered. Lena swallowed, her throat raw. She wouldn't. But the words were right there. "We've been through so much. I just want what's best for my daughter. I hope the world sees her struggle the way I have." It wasn't a direct attack, but it wasn't private anymore. And that meant every vulture in the industry now had an open invitation to pick apart her life. Shaq set the phone down carefully. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. "I don't know." But deep down she did. The bills, the never-ending hospital bills, the calls that had gone unanswered, the options they had run out of. And now, someone had offered her mother a way out. Lena clenched her fists. "She sold me out." Shaq leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "You don't know that yet." Lena let out a bitter laugh. "I don't?" Shaq watched her carefully, waiting. Lena forced herself to breathe, but it felt like drowning. She had fought so damn hard to make sure people saw her as an artist, not as a sob story. And now? Now the whole world was talking about her pain, not her paintings. She didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Instead, she walked. Past the street corners where she used to sit, past the places where no one had noticed her before. Now people recognized her. A woman passing by whispered her name. A man gave her a sad smile. A stranger actually had the nerve to say, "Stay strong, honey." Lena's stomach turned, because this was exactly what she had tried to avoid. She wasn't some charity case. She wasn't just a girl with an illness. She was an artist, and they had stolen that from her. Shaq found her at a basketball court at midnight, sitting on the empty bleachers, knees pulled to her chest. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside her, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke. "You know how many times people tried to write my story for me?" Lena didn't answer. Shaq continued. "Reporters, coaches, even people I thought were friends. They all had their own version of who I was supposed to be. Lena stared at the cracked pavement. What did you do? Shaq exhaled. I took the damn pen back. Lena looked at him then, and he met her gaze head on. You let them define you. You lose. Shaq said, voice steady. You let them put you in a box. You disappear. And you? He shook his head. You didn't come this far just to let someone else tell your story. Lena swallowed hard. So what do I do? Shaq leaned back, stretching out his legs. That's up to you. And that was the moment she realized something. This wasn't just about an article. This was about her next move, because the whole world was watching now. And if they wanted a story, she was damn sure gonna give them one. At 8 a.m., she walked into a studio, not a gallery, not an interview, a recording studio. Shaq had set it up for her. Lena sat in front of the camera staring at the lens, heartbeat pounding. Then she hit record. Let's talk. She took a breath. No script, no PR team, just her. You've all seen the article. You've read the headlines. And let's be honest, most of you didn't know my name until someone slapped a tragic backstory on it. Her pulse was steady now. But that's not my story. She gestured toward the paintings stacked behind her. This is... She leaned forward. You want to know who I am? I'm an artist. I fought for every painting I've ever sold. I fought for every chance I've gotten. And I'm not going to stop now. She didn't look away from the camera. So, to anyone who thought they could control my story, watch me take it back. She ended the video, and within an hour, it was everywhere. The response was instant. People weren't talking about the article anymore. They were talking about her video. Shaq called her that afternoon. Told you. Lena actually smiled, because for the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again. And this time, she wasn't just surviving, she was winning. Lena's video wasn't just a response, it was a statement. It spread faster than the article ever did, drowning out the pity-driven headlines and shifting the narrative back where it belonged. People weren't talking about her illness anymore. They were talking about her fight. And that changed everything. The next morning, Shaq called. You ready for this? Lena yawned, rubbing her eyes. For what? Shaq chuckled. Check your phone. She squinted at the screen, expecting the usual wave of notifications. But what she saw nearly made her drop the damn thing. Her video had 20 million views. 20 million. Lena sat up so fast her head spun. Holy! Shaq laughed. Told you, superstar. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments, past the reporters trying to get interviews, past the celebrities reposting her message. People weren't just watching, they were inspired. And then came the offers, not just for art, for partnerships, sponsorships, interviews. Every brand that had ignored her before was now knocking at her door. We'd love to collaborate with you. Your story is inspiring. Let's discuss an endorsement deal. We see an opportunity for a long-term art campaign. It was overwhelming. Lena wasn't used to people wanting something from her. Not like this. So she did what she always did. She called Shaq. They met at a small cafe, tucked away from the noise of the city. No cameras, no press, just them. Lena folded her arms. Why do I feel like I'm about to be sold? Shaq grinned. Because you are. Lena groaned, slumping back in her chair. Great. Shaq leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Listen, you're at a crossroads. This is the moment where you decide who you are. Lena frowned. Haven't I already done that? Shaq shook his head. Not yet. You fought for people to see your art. Now you gotta decide what you do with that power. Lena hesitated. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the moment everything exploded. What if this isn't about me? Shaq tilted his head. Go on. Lena swallowed. I mean, yeah, this all started because of my fight, but I'm not the only one struggling. Shaq nodded, waiting. Lena stared at her hands. What if I could do something bigger? Shaq smiled. Now you're thinking like a game changer. 2 days later, Lena made her next move. She sat in front of the camera again, heart pounding. But this time, It wasn't about defending herself. It was about something bigger. She hit record. So let's talk about what happens next. She paused, collecting her thoughts. The world wanted my story. You've heard it. You know what I've been through. And now, I want to talk about the kids who are still fighting. She exhaled. I don't need all this money. I never did this for fame. So, here's the deal. I'm donating half of everything I've made to kids battling chronic illnesses. Kids like me, who just need a damn chance. Her heart pounded. You supported me. Now, let's support them. She hit post, and the world lost its mind. The response was instant. Headlines changed overnight. From fighter to advocate, Lena Carter turns viral success into real impact. Art with a purpose, the girl who refused pity now gives others hope. Lena Carter's movement. This isn't just a story, it's a revolution. And just like that, she wasn't a charity case. She wasn't just a viral moment. She was a force. Shaq grinned as he watched the news cycle shift. When Lena called, she sounded breathless. This is insane, Shaq laughed. Told you. Lena exhaled. So, what now? Shaq leaned back. Now? You make sure this isn't just a moment. You build something real. Lena hesitated. I don't know how. Shaq's voice softened. You don't have to do it alone. Lena swallowed hard. She wasn't used to having help, but maybe, for the first time, she didn't have to fight by herself. That's when Shaq made his own move. He called a meeting with some of the biggest names in the business: corporate sponsors, medical foundations, nonprofit leaders. He laid it out, plain and simple. This girl's the real deal, he said. And we're not going to let this be another viral story that fades. By the time he walked out of the room, he had secured long-term funding for Lena's initiative. Not charity, an actual movement. He called Lena that night. You just became bigger than the art superstar. Lena laughed. No pressure, huh? Shaq grinned. Nah, you got this. The next morning, Lena Carter was everywhere. Not just as an artist, not just as a survivor, as a leader. Her initiative, Art for the Fighters, was officially launched, dedicated to providing funding, art supplies, and emotional support to kids battling chronic illnesses. And for the first time in her life, Lena wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for something bigger. The world had watched, waiting for her to fall apart. Instead, she changed the game, and she was just getting started. Lena never imagined this. Not the headlines. Not the movement. Not the way strangers now looked at her paintings like they actually saw something real. She had spent so much of her life fighting to survive. Now, she was building something that would outlive her. It started small. A few murals in children's hospitals. Art workshops for kids battling illnesses like hers. Then came the schools, the galleries, the public spaces filled with color and defiance. Each piece telling a different story. Each one reminding the world that art wasn't just decoration. It was rebellion. It was survival. It was a weapon against being forgotten. Shaq stood beside her when they unveiled the largest mural yet, right in the heart of downtown. The press was there. Cameras flashed. The world was watching. But Lena didn't care about any of that. She only cared about the wall in front of her, the blank canvas waiting to come to life. She took a deep breath, paintbrush in hand. And then, she began. For hours, she worked. Shaq sat on the sidewalk, watching, shaking his head with a smile. You gonna let me help or nah? Lena smirked. Stick to basketball, big guy. Shaq laughed, holding up his hands in surrender. She painted through the day, through the night. The world outside blurred. Just her, the wall, and the story she was about to leave behind. By the time she stepped back, exhausted but proud, the entire city had stopped to watch. And what they saw left them speechless. The mural was breathtaking. It stretched across the entire side of the building, towering over the crowd. In the center stood a girl in the middle of a storm, unshaken, unafraid, her eyes burning with the same fire that had fueled Lena from the start. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood figures of other fighters, kids, survivors, dreamers, each one painted with bold strokes, as if daring the world to see them. Lena turned, facing the crowd. This is for every kid who was told they couldn't. Shaq placed a hand on her shoulder, voice low. You did that. Lena swallowed hard, trying to take it all in. We did. But the mural wasn't finished yet. Because hidden within the painting, woven into the shadows, was one final message. A detail no one would notice right away. A secret meant for those who really looked. It was a single phrase, painted in tiny, careful letters. I am still here. The moment the world found it, everything changed again. The discovery went viral. People analyzed it, speculated, debated. Some said it was about her survival. Some thought it was about the legacy she was leaving behind. But Lena? She knew the truth. It wasn't about her at all. It was about every kid who had ever felt invisible, because now they weren't, and they never would be again. Months later, Shaq and Lena stood in front of the mural one last time. The city had changed. She had changed. Shaq nudged her. So what's next? Lena smirked. Something bigger. Shaq chuckled. That's what I like to hear. She took one last look at the storm, the girl standing tall within it, and smiled. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was unstoppable. And this was just the beginning. Some stories deserve to be seen. Some voices refuse to be silenced. Lena Carter turned struggle into art and art into impact. What will you turn yours into? The world is watching. The next move? That's on you. Stay curious, stay bold, and never stop looking for the stories that matter.